All set, Karen?
I'm ready.
In 1885, a 17-year-old girl named Afy Hendricks from Kansas City sat spellbound at the Opera House for a production of Julius Caesar.
Now, during the garden scene, she held her breath as Portia laid her head upon Brutus's broad chest and wound her slender arms like ivy around his stout neck.
Afy trembled as Brutus slowly raised his kneeling wife, wrapped his strong bare arms around her, and gave her a romantic connubial kiss.
She raved about the show all night, and the next day she told her girlfriends, "My fondest wish in life is that I would be to pillow my head upon that manly breast."
The actor was the rising star Louis James, and Afy's wish came true. 7 years later, in September 1892, she joined his acting company, and by the end of December, she had married him.
Fast work. She was 26 years his junior, but it proved to be a long and a happy marriage.
It would be hard to find a more paradoxical actor than Louis James. One of the great exponents of Shakespeare between 1880 and 1910 in America, he was a boyish prankster at heart.
His fellow actors stoically endured his on-stage shenanigans, which threatened to crack them up at the moments of tragic solemnity.
In one performance as Othello, he used his burnt cork makeup to paint a black mustache and goatee on the face of his just murdered Desdemona. The actors who entered into the tragic scene had to turn upstage to smother their convulsions of laughter, which the audience took for sobs of grief.
Not until the actress faced the mirror in her dressing room did she discover why James restrained her from taking her curtain call.
When, as Brutus, he felled the mighty Caesar, James dropped a pinch of red pepper onto the actor's tunic, right under his nose. So, in the middle of Marc Antony's speech denouncing the conspirators, the corpse of Caesar sneezed loudly.
As the dead Romeo in the tomb scene, when his Juliet bent over to kiss the poison from his lips, James clamped his teeth over the tip of her nose and held her there an embarrassingly long time. The list goes on.
And yet this jolly joker moved critics to dub him the successor of Edwin Booth. Well, not all critics. The cranky Willa Cather had little use for him. Upon witnessing his Othello in 1895, she wrote,
"He lacked the transcendent emotion, the inspired enlightenment, the complete majesty of the highest art. He was earnest, intelligent, and dignified, but he fell short of tragic force. He was too much of a gentleman, too civilized, too well behaved."
Arizona audiences clearly did not share her opinion. They thrilled when he made his 1897 debut in Prescott as Spartacus in Robert M. Byrd's tragedy, The Gladiator. He went on to Phoenix to perform Othello and Romeo at the age of 55 with a stellar supporting cast: the young Alma Kruger, Guy Lindsley, and the grand old man of the theater, Harry Langdon.
He returned in January 1898 to perform Julius Caesar, and in January 1899 to perform Othello, Macbeth, and Hamlet, and then again in December 1899 to perform Macbeth and The Winter's Tale.
As a boy in Tremont, Illinois, James grew up in a socially prominent family. His father knew Abraham Lincoln, and James's boyhood friend was Robert Todd Lincoln.
Tremont was a sleepy little town in 1850 with a population of about 750. And by the time James was 10, his family had moved to Chicago.
James's father wanted to make him a lawyer.
His mother pictured him more as a minister.
So the boy rebelled at age 18.
First, he ran off to war as a soldier, and then he became became an actor.
He was an original member of the Chicago Zouave Cadets and joined the Union Army in 1860.
Now, stationed in Louisville, where he made his debut at age 20 in a local stock company, he met the renowned actor Lawrence Barrett, who became his fast friend. Through him, he got an engagement with the prestigious Art Street Theater in Philadelphia.
He was soon playing supporting roles to Clara Morris, Fanny Davenport, John McCullough, and other luminaries of the theater.
And while in Philadelphia, he met and married Lillian Scanlon, a renowned beauty.
In 1871, he landed a job in Augustin Daly's famous Fifth Avenue Theater Company in New York.
Now, Lillian died in 1876, leaving James a widower with 2 children, Millie and Levitt. Both grew up to be actors.
By the 1880s, James was alternating the roles of Iago and Othello with Lawrence Barrett. The novice actress, Marie Wainwright, was Desdemona. James played the Ghost to Barrett's Hamlet, Brutus to Barrett's Cassius, and he fell for the lovely Marie. Well, despite their friendship, Barrett and James parted ways in 1885, apparently because Barrett snubbed James and Wainwright socially. He wouldn't allow his daughters to associate with them. Why?
Because Marie Wainwright divorced her husband in order to marry Lewis. The 2 stars started living together in a common law marriage that took place in Boston in March of 1882.
Scandal ensued when newspapers reported that Marie's husband had never actually granted her a divorce. In 1886, James finally branched out on his own, forming his own company and playing starring roles.
Wainwright seceded from Barrett's company to join him.
But in 3 years, the relationship turned sour due to professional jealousy, and they agreed to tour separately.
And as we've seen, James married in December 1892 to the ingenue of his company, Miss Afy Hendricks.
In October 1893, Marie Wainwright caused a new scandal by filing for divorce, exposing him to the taint of bigamy. James argued that they had lived under the stipulation that neither should ever claim the other as husband or wife. The court formally divorced Lewis and Marie. Problem solved.
Now, a few years later, James met a novice actress, Miss Alma Kruger, a native of Pittsburgh who had just finished her scholastic degree at Franklin Sargent's American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City. In the graduation matinee, she had the good fortune to have given the part that would display her remarkable histrionic gifts, Electra, in Sophocles' Greek tragedy. She acted so beautifully that 3 prominent managers offered her a position in their companies. She accepted Louis James' invitation to be his leading lady and soon became one of the finest young Shakespearean actresses in the country.
By this time, it was generally accepted that Louis James was the prime candidate to inherit the mantle of Edwin Booth, America's greatest classical actor and possibly the greatest Hamlet of all time. Booth's shoes were difficult to fill, and critics made odorous comparisons between his successors and him. Louis James invited such comparisons by using Booth's costumes and scenery in his stagings of Hamlet and Othello. But the 2 actors couldn't have been more different.
Booth was slight of figure and no more than 5 feet 7 inches tall.
James was bullish of figure and 6 feet tall.
Booth's style was quiet, sensitive, and gentle.
James's style was stentorian, heroic, and manly.
And Western audiences thrilled to that manly presence.
Today, we'll take a closer look at just 4 of his 10 productions in the Arizona Territory. Many critics dubbed The Jealous Moor Louis James's masterpiece. Othello is the story of an interracial marriage gone horribly awry. A Moorish general elopes with Desdemona, a Venetian noble's daughter, who loves him for the dangers he has passed. But a hateful, envious ensign named Iago sets out to destroy their love. He insinuates Desdemona is unfaithful with Othello's handsome lieutenant, Cassio. Iago invents false stories and plants Desdemona's handkerchief on Cassio to drive Othello mad with jealousy. In the end, Othello smothers his loving wife in their bed, only to discover his trusted friend's foul plot and his wife's pure innocence. He stabs himself, ending his life with the heartbreaking words, "I kissed thee ere I killed thee."
The text of Jane's performance followed Edwin Booth's example. The role of Cassio's jealous mistress, Bianca, was omitted, along with the hateful scene of Act 4, where Iago still further poisons the already jealous mind of Othello by making him overhear and misconstrue Cassio's smutty talk with Bianca.
James cut, in addition, the end of Act 4, Scene 1, where Othello slaps Desdemona in public. James no doubt feared that this act of deliberate cruelty would diminish too much the audience's sympathy for Othello.
But perhaps the unkindest cut of all was the bulk of the willow scene between Desdemona and Iago's wife, Emilia, where Shakespeare so beautifully contrasts the morality of the two women and arouses pity for Desdemona, gotta get her name right, as she prepares for bed.
In his 1897 tour, James was using Edwin Booth's scenery. And here we see Charles Witham's design for the Act 2 terrace in Cyprus, with the harbor and ships in the background. Really gorgeous. Too bad the Phoenix Opera House was little better than a barn. In the Arizona Republican, an anonymous puff described James's Othello, unlike the barbarian of the old days, as a creation with all the latent nobility, the splendid authority, the tenderness of a man who could be loved by fair Desdemona, a barbarian but subdued by the urbane influences of the court of Venice.
Guy Lindsley made a truly hateful Iago, pretending to be Othello's sympathetic friend while driving him mad with jealousy.
Guy, incidentally, was a bit of a Lothario in his offstage love life, and eventually it caught up with him.
You want me to take your line too?
A startling event?
That was yours.
A startling event took place in the third act of Othello during a May 1896 performance in Columbus, Ohio.
It's still yours.
While Othello was choking Iago, an enraged woman leapt from the boxes onto the stage and began to horsewhip Lindsley.
Mine. James stood by, dumbfounded.
Guy recognized his assailant, rose to his feet, and stammered to James,
"This is Georgia of St. Louis."
The audience went wild, no doubt assuming that the woman had become so enraged with Iago that she was whipping him for the damage he was doing to Othello.
But the newspaper accounts confirm that Georgia Kimball of St. Louis was Lindsley's former lover.
Lindsley's well-to-do St. Louis family had urged him to break off this relationship.
A country girl was not a suitable wife.
Georgia followed him to Ohio to shame him in public for proposing marriage but failing to set a date and then discarding her.
Now, this astonishing scene played out just 10 months before the actor's Arizona debut.
Willa Cather offers some interesting insights in her 1895 review when James, Lindsley, and Kruger played Othello in Nebraska. Cather found Kruger's Desdemona a delightful surprise.
She was beautiful, sad, and tender. Her sympathy is quick and responsive, and she gives the part so many of those little natural touches, like the way her eyes roam around the council chambers until she finds Othello, the way she closes her eyes when she first embraces her at Cyprus, Guy Lindsley was such a tender, sympathetic Iago in company, so grieved and oppressed by the sins of the world. Alone, he was so exultant and gleeful in his malignity. He loved evil-doing as some men love drink. The thought of mischief was sweet to him. He varied the usual renting by keeping up his reckless bravado and devil-may-care attitude to the very last. Even after he is bound, he is just the same. And when he stands above the corpse of Othello, the look of triumph and rampant deviltry, of joy and demoniacal exultation were a filling close to a tragedy on the power of evil.
Alfred Ayers, the famed elocutionist and critic, deplored the strange new interpretation Lewis James gave to one of Othello's scenes in Act 3, where Desdemona offers him her handkerchief.
How now, my dear Othello? Your dinner and generous islanders by you invited do attend your presence.
I am to blame.
Why do you speak so faintly? Are you not well?
I have a pain upon my forehead here.
Why, that's worth watching. Twill away again. Let me bind it hard. Within the hour it will be well.
Your napkin is too little. Let it alone. Come, I'll go in with you.
I'm very sorry you're not well.
Othello means, of course, that she should let his aching head alone. But James was of the opinion that she should let alone her handkerchief, which he has thrown to the floor. This Mr. James makes very clear by having Desdemona make a movement to pick up the handkerchief and by stopping her with a gesture and the words, "Let it alone." Desdemona begins the next scene with,
"Where should I have lose that handkerchief, Emilia?"
Her words make nonsense of James's interpretation. She'd know exactly where to look for it. Shakespeare's intent is that Desdemona is so dazed and perplexed by Othello's behavior that she gives no thought to the handkerchief. As a result, in accordance with the requirements of the story, she goes away without it. Despite these minor production flaws, James's Othello thrilled audiences all over the country. He gave the tragic Moor a tender, gentle side that made it plausible for Desdemona to fall in love with him despite their age difference and their racial difference. His characterization was a masterpiece, and few actors of his time could match him. In January 1898, James returned to Arizona with new leading partners, Miss Mary Emerson, Frank Peters, and Barry Johnstone.
Miss Emerson, tall, slim, regal-looking, and low-voiced, made a strong impression.
Frank Peters, a sturdy actor in his 40s, had played lots of Shakespearean roles. And handsome young Barry Johnstone was an up-and-coming Cassius.
These were the stars of Julius Caesar.
A quick refresher on the storyline. In 44 BC, the Roman Senate titled the general Julius Caesar a perpetual dictator. Fearing that he intended to overthrow the republic and establish a monarchy, a group of conspirators led by Cassius Longinus persuaded the great patriot Marcus Junius Brutus to join them in assassinating Caesar. As Caesar's friend, Brutus only reluctantly agrees to participate. It is his job to convince the Roman people that Caesar was a serious threat to the republic and had to be killed.
But Marc Antony, Caesar's devoted friend, persuades the mob that Caesar was a great patriot who loved his people and the republic and would never have made himself king. The mob turns against the conspirators and civil war ensues.
Marc Antony forms a triumvirate of military rulers who defeat the patriots in battle.
And Brutus's beloved wife, Portia, kills herself by swallowing hot coals.
Both Brutus and his friend Cassius commit suicide on the battlefield. Renowned throughout the country as Brutus since the early 1880s, James used Edwin Booth's stage version of Julius Caesar. The text was arranged into 6 acts, each act with a sumptuous setting. For James, one of the great moments was the garden scene where Brutus paces with anguish in the dead of night, and his wife, Portia, finds him absent from their bed and comes to find out what's troubling him.
Is Brutus sick? And will he steal out of his wholesome bed to dare the vile contagion of the night? And tempt the roomy and unpurged air to add onto his sickness? No, my Brutus, you have some sycophants within your mind, which by the right and virtue of my place I ought to know of, and upon my knees I charm you by my once commended beauty, and by all of your vows of love that you unfold to me, yourself, your half. Why are you so heavy?
Kneel not, gentle Portia.
I should not need if you were gentle Brutus.
You are my true and honorable wife, as dear to me as are the ruddy drops that visit my sad heart. With these words, James slid her slowly up from her knees, folded his strong bare arms around her, and planted that connubial kiss upon her lips.
Young ladies in the audience were a bit startled and titillated. Was this quite proper? Miss Emerson, after all, was young enough to be his daughter, and in real life, she and James were not married. Shocking!
The assassination of Caesar took place in the Senate chamber, the scene design taken from Gérôme's famous painting of the assassination. Caesar, played by Colin Kemper, fell at the base of Pompey's statue to the audience's left. The 6 conspirators were initially grouped to the audience's right, but converged on Caesar at the left, where they stabbed him to death. After the assassination, Marc Antony confronts the conspirators and begs them only to let him deliver a eulogy for Caesar. Brutus, in his generosity, makes the fatal error of allowing him to do so, and Cassius takes him aside.
You know not what you do. Do not consent that Antony speak in his funeral. Know how much the people may be moved that what he will utter.
But Brutus insists that Marc Antony will do no harm and tells him, "Here, take you Caesar's body. You shall not in your funeral speech blame us, but speak all good you can devise of Caesar, and say you do it by our permission." Big mistake.
In James' staging, as Antony knelt by the corpse of Caesar, the suspicious Cassius makes an attempt to stab Marc Antony in the back. Not a bad piece of staging, but Harry Johnstone, as Cassius, overdid it. As one critic said,
that Cassius should seize the opportunity to rid the conspirators of the one man he knows would be dangerous to them, and that Brutus would prevent him from doing it, is very well. It is good business, dramatically and theatrically, but Cassius shouldn't make quite so much fuss and flourish over it. A tendency towards melodramatic elaboration is the one fault of Mr. Barry Johnstone's otherwise most intelligent and impressive performance of Cassius. He comes near to departing more than once from the dignity of tragedy. Frank Peters made the most of Marc Antony's oration, beginning with, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him."
And what a neat twist when he starts to change the direction of the eulogy as he says of Caesar.
"He was my friend, faithful and just to me." But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. Many critics felt that he marred the effect by shouting at the end, "Here was a Caesar! When comes such another?"
James excited audiences to demand 2 curtain calls after the famous scene at the eve of the decisive battle, when the ghost of Julius Caesar visits Brutus in his tent.
Who comes here? I think it is the weakness of mine eyes that shapes this monstrous apparition. It comes upon me. Art thou anything? Art thou some god, some angel, or some devil that makes my blood cold and my hair to stare? Speak to me what thou art.
Thy evil spirit, Brutus.
In Brutus's quarrel with Cassius and his ensuing confrontation with the ghost, James achieved the sublime. One critic trumpeted,
I would rather see Louis James play Brutus than all the other legitimate actors bunched together in a round of tragedies. His Brutus will live long after himself as one of the most notable and masterly renditions in classic drama.
In September 1898, Louis James teamed up with an old acting partner, Frederick Ward, and Catherine Kidder to stage 4 great plays at the major Arizona theaters: Macbeth, Othello, The School for Scandal, and Hamlet. Fred Ward was no stranger to Arizona audiences. He had played a repulsive Richard III in Tucson in 1885 and had won national renown.
Miss Kidder was touted for her cool, statuesque dignity and perfect elocution.
Sad to say, the trio failed to play in Prescott, but they created a sensation in January 1899 at the commodious new Patton Grand Opera House in Phoenix and at the Tucson Opera House. These were the only performances of Hamlet and Macbeth in territorial Arizona, truly historic events.
James's Hamlet, staged repeatedly since 1887, when he and Marie Wainwright toured together, was by now perfected and played with elocutionary skill, which I didn't just show, though a bit unconventionally.
A quick refresher here. Hamlet's uncle Claudius poisons Hamlet's father in his sleep and then seduces and marries Hamlet's mother, Gertrude, and seizes the throne. The ghost of Hamlet's father exhorts Hamlet to revenge his foul and most unnatural murder. Not sure if the ghost is real, Hamlet makes Claudius watch a play in which a similar murder takes place. Claudius's fiery reaction plainly shows his guilt. In the course of vengeance, Hamlet inadvertently brings about the deaths of his beloved Ophelia, her father Polonius, her brother Laertes, and his own mother. James' prompt book reveals that James took Hamlet to the barbers and artfully snipped and cut in such a way as to make Hamlet an action hero, not a thinker.
The other characters lost entire scenes and speeches. The entire opening scene of the play, when the ghost appears to Horatio and the soldiers on the castle battlement, was axed.
When the players arrived at Elsinore, Hamlet orders them to play the murder of Gonzago before his mother and uncle.
And after their exit, James cut 42 lines of the famed, "Oh, what a rogue and pleasant slave am I" soliloquy, and began abruptly and fiercely with,
I have heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play have by the very cunning of the scene been struck so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions.
So Hamlet did not reproach himself for failing to take revenge, but announced at once his plan to entrap Claudius.
Just before the play within the play, James cut in half Hamlet's advice to the players, along with his tender protestation of friendship to Horatio. Claudius lost his prayer scene, where Hamlet catches him struggling with his guilty conscience and makes the fatal error of failing to slay him on the spot. Hamlet then goes to give his mother a good tongue lashing about her sinful marriage. Thinking that Claudius is spying on him from behind the tapestry, he mistakenly slays Polonius.
In Shakespeare's script, Gertrude reports the death of Polonius to Claudius, but hides the fact that Hamlet is only pretending to be insane. This she has promised Hamlet she would do, and it's an important turning point in Gertrude's redemption.
But not in James's version. He cut it. Fortinbras, Prince of Norway, was entirely omitted, and his accession to the throne after Hamlet's death was not announced.
Horatio was not permitted to attempt suicide in the end by drinking from the poisoned cup that killed Gertrude, and the curtain fell on Hamlet's dying speech.
Oh, good Horatio, what a wounded name. Things thus standing unknown shall live behind me. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story. Oh, I die, Horatio. The potent poison quite o'erthrows my spirit. The rest is silence.
Poor Horatio didn't even get to say the famous line, "Good night, sweet prince, and may flights of angels sing thee to thy rest."
With these draconian cuts, James spurred the plot forward with the taut pace of a melodrama. His virile, energetic Hamlet pursued his vengeance, in the words of a Los Angeles critic, with the pertinacity of a hound following the trail of his master. James staged the play within the play scene traditionally, with the actors upstage center on a raised platform. Ophelia sat on the audience's left, Hamlet lounged on the floor, stage center, and the king and queen sat on their thrones on the audience's right.
The staging was evidently inspired by Daniel Maclise's oil painting, The Play Scene in Hamlet.
A few oddities marred the production. The Times reviewer attacked James for ending the closet scene by blubbering in his mother's arms, an act entirely inconsistent with Hamlet's character and wholly at variance with the text. James also went off the stage 3 times during his scene with Ophelia, only to return each time and shout, "Get thee to a nunnery!" The result was an artistic botch and 4 rounds of applause from the gallery. The casting and the cutting misplaced focus. Instead of playing Hamlet's nemesis, Claudius, Fred Ward played the ghost. The major role of Claudius, played by the lesser-known actor Frank Peters, was so badly cut and slashed that it lost its impact.
As did the role of Gertrude, played by Loretta Wells.
The San Francisco Call praised James's decidedly youthful Scandinavian Hamlet. He wore a golden blonde wig and a mustache. His enunciation was clear. He didn't rant. In his speech and action, he followed his own directions to the players and never tore a passion to tatters.
His concept was off the beaten track, but alive with artistic intelligence and technical skills. He was vindictive and vengeful, yet with a most polite young prince who knocks loudly and coughs discreetly before he enters a room.
The Los Angeles Herald, far less enchanted, called James's production an offense against art, for his reading was so entirely different from accepted standards, so changed in its arrangement, and so subversive of all teaching on the subject that it could only leave the student of Shakespeare baffled. Yet, in his wild burst of grief over Ophelia's body in the graveyard scene, and in the fury of the sword fight in the final scene, James created a living, breathing Hamlet, one that rivaled the greatest Hamlets ever seen.
Miss Kidder's Ophelia, while picturesque, apparently left something to be desired. A San Francisco reviewer explained, "Miss Kidder is out of her element as Ophelia, though there is always the charm of her personality to consider. She is not so much of a girl as she is a woman, for the molding of her mentality is essentially mature. And yet she acted the role with heartbreaking tenderness and pathos. In her mad scene, she radiated an ethereal aura, and her singing voice was soft as honey dripping from the comb.
Barry Johnstone made a fiery Laertes, although he was inclined to talk through his teeth. He was especially good in the graveyard scene when Laertes leaps into Ophelia's grave and embraces her one last time, and then scuffles with Hamlet.
Harry Langdon, the American theater's grand old man, played Ophelia's doomed father, Polonius, with humor and charm. His famous long-winded advice to his son Laertes always won a rowdy round of applause, as if they were operatic arias.
Maybe this was because every man in the audience knew that speech by heart. Schoolboys in that era were required to memorize it. Remember these highlights? Be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar. The friends thou hast, grapple them to thy soul with hoops of steel. Costly thy habit as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy, rich, not gaudy, for the apparel oft proclaims the man. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man.
The production was beautifully and swiftly staged, with Edwin Booth's scenic costumes and designs, and James, whose delivery often recalled Booth's, rose to moments of melting pathos.
The flexible and exquisitely tender, sympathetic tones of his voice surpassed those of virtually every classical actor of the day, in one Los Angeles reviewer's opinion. As the ideal, sturdy, and intellectual Saxon, James could not help but impress. No modern actor has a more princely bearing, a greater facility of gesture, or a more impressive and mobile face. The LA critic defied James's detractors and concluded, "This is a Hamlet that will take the place in the history of the stage as one of the greatest of this age." Lewis James staged a thrilling production of the Scottish play, A Tragedy of Ambition.
Fired by the three witches' prophecy that he will be king, Macbeth and his lady murder Duncan, king of Scotland, and seize the crown.
But then, driven by fear that someone else may murder him, Macbeth makes his kingdom a slaughterhouse. His victims include his friend Banquo and the family of the heroic Macduff.
It was a spare production. James omitted the murder of Lady Macbeth and her children. Too gruesome?
And he axed the murder of Banquo as well. He ended the tragedy with a climactic battle in which Macbeth Macbeth was slain by Macduff on stage, not off. So Macduff didn't enter at the end with Macbeth's severed head on a pike. Both
the prop master and the audience were no doubt grateful. I mean, the former didn't have to create a grisly and convincing head, and the later didn't have to actually look at it.
And no doubt it was more satisfying to actually see Macduff skewer the villain who slew his family. For the 1898-99 Western tour, James on every other night gave the title role to Frederick Ward, while playing the heroic Macduff, the Thane of Fife, aflame with that strong animal magnetism which is the charm of his impersonations. Then in December 1899, James returned to Arizona to play Macbeth, this time with Charles B. Hanford as Macduff. In both productions, Catherine Kidder was the Lady Macbeth.
Miss Kidder was a bit light for the heavy role of Lady Macbeth, but she acted it with splendid dignity and queenly bearing. Feminine through and through, not mannish, an 1899 New York Times review scoffed at her. Showy, picturesque Lady Macbeth, quite devoid of the tragic note, generally suggesting the recitationist rather than the actor. But a California critic plays Kidder's intelligent and intellectual interpretation of her strength and diction. She played the role as a tender-hearted wife, full of love and devotion to her husband, who, what she did out of affection and ambition for her liege lord.
My dearest love, Duncan comes here tonight.
And when goes hence?
Tomorrow, as he purposes.
Oh, never shall the sun tomorrow see. Your face, my thane, is a book where men may read strange matters to beguile the time. Look like the time, welcome in your eye, your hand, your tongue. Look like an innocent flower, but be the serpent underneath it. He's that coming must be provided for, and you shall put this night's great business into my dispatch. What shall to all our nights and days to come give solely sovereign way and masterdom?
We will speak further.
Only look up clear. Do not alter. Favor ever is to fear. Leave all the rest to me.
Miss Kidder was the faithful Saint Bernard, even in the midst of her crimes, not the Scottish wolf. She fell short of Shakespeare's fiend-like queen, but she was great.
And James held his audiences spellbound in silence during the murder scene.
There was not a sound, not a flicker of light, nothing to break it. All eyes were fixed upon the darkened stage with a gruesome fascination. Macbeth, by slow degrees, was soliloquizing his courage up to the horrible point of murdering Duncan in his sleep. In the pauses of his gusty, choking regrets and resolves, the plaintive note of the screech owl accentuated the loneliness of the night. The speech ended. Macbeth hovered about the entrance to the sleeping chamber, and when it seemed as if nerves could no longer bear the tension, he sneakingly slid in. And then the horror of waiting in expectancy while the bloody deed was being done.
When Lady Macbeth stole on the scene, what a partial relief it was. Then Macbeth returned with the dripping daggers.
I have done the deed. Didst thou not hear a noise?
I heard the owl scream and the crickets cry. Did you not speak?
When?
Now.
As I descended?
I.
This is a sorry sight.
A foolish thought to say, a sorry sight.
Methought I heard a voice cry, sleep no more. Macbeth does murder sleep. Innocent sleep, sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care. The death of each day's life, sore labor's bath, balm of hurt minds, great nature's second course, chief nourisher in life's feast.
What do you mean?
Macbeth shall sleep no more.
Who was it thus cried? Why, noble thane, you do unbend your noble strength to think so brain-sickly of things. Go, get some water and wash these filthy witnesses from your hand.
Lewis James was candidly melodramatic, but then so is the play. We know from a New York Times interview in June 1906 that James opposed the idea of having the ghost of Banquo appear at the banquet with a bloody gash across his throat. Such literalism, he believed, was unnecessary.
Macbeth's horrified imagination could make the ghost seem more real to the audience.
I believe in obliterating altogether the material appearance of an apparition, when an actor can succeed in attaining the same results by suggestion. Reflecting a reality is greater art than either reproducing or exaggerating it.
The 1889 review confirmed that the spectator was imagined and not represented.
The ghost, too. A Los Angeles critic depicted the dramatic conclusion of James's banquet scene. James sank wearily into a chair and removed his crown as Miss Kidder, in an agony of feeling, threw herself prostrate at his feet. The curtain descended upon this striking tableau without a word being spoken. It was a triumph of pantomimic acting.
Sad to say, James butchered the text of Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking scene.
He cut out the doctor entirely, so Miss Kidder didn't have the time during the doctor's speeches to the lady-in-waiting to exhibit her remarkable skill as a pantomimic actress. In this scene, she dreams aloud, mourning the murder of Macduff's innocent wife and children. In vain, she strives to wash the blood of her husband's victims from her hands. Miss Kidder's tearful depiction of the Queen's guilt and remorse moved her audience to profound pity.
The Thane of Fife had a wife. Where is she now? What, will these hands ne'er be clean? No more of that, my lord, no more of that. You mar all this starting. There's a smell of blood still, and all the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Oh! Oh! Oh!
Malcolm, the prince who inherits the Scottish throne at the end of the play, was played by an up-and-coming young actor named Thomas Coffin Cook. Here he is in his costume for the role. Cook enjoyed the scene in Act 4 where Macduff persuades Malcolm to fight against Macbeth's armies and take the crown that is rightfully his. Malcolm pretends that he's unworthy of the crown, arguing his many defects of character.
Unfortunately for Cook, he lost the play's closing speech, where Malcolm forecasts brighter days to come and invites everyone to his coronation. He also clarifies that Lady Macbeth took her own life.
But it's all over when the bad guy dies, right? So who needs a 16-line speech from the future king? This was one of the drawbacks of the star system in the Gilded Age. The star cut and slashed the speeches of the other characters so that he or she could dominate the stage. Still, James's Macbeth was a thrilling psychological study, a riveting anti-hero of flesh and blood. In addition to the 4 productions we've looked at here, James staged Romeo and Juliet, The Winter's Tale, A Cavalier of France, The Gladiator, The School for Scandal, and The Rivals in the Arizona Territory, 10 different plays in all. The remarkable success of Lewis James and his co-stars in Arizona tells us something significant about our pioneers.
They craved more than sensational melodramas and minstrel shows. Shakespeare and the classics stirred them, and they appreciated fine acting and beautiful staging.
From the 1890s to 1912, when we achieved statehood, Arizona experienced a cultural explosion, and Lewis James's dynamic productions helped to set it off. James deserves far more credit than history has accorded him. His original interpretations, though sometimes misguided, were the work of a thoughtful artist with the courage of his convictions.
He died of a heart attack in March 1909 in Helena, Montana, preparing for his performance as Cardinal Wolsey in Henry VIII.
His fellow players remembered him as one of the most jovial, kind, and generous actors they'd ever worked with. How fitting it is that his gravestone in Kansas City bears the same words that were pronounced over the body of Brutus. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man. Thank you.
Karen.
Are you out for hire? You too. Are you married?
No, he's.
Not quite the attraction.
Thank you.
How often was he actually in Prescott doing performances?
He did the Gladiator in Prescott for one night, and there was a news article that said he was coming back to Prescott and was going to appear at the Opera House, but then that just evaporated. I mean, there was no comment further, and I'm thinking that they just took the train south to Phoenix and didn't stop here.
And so they would perform at the Elks Theater? Where did they perform?
No, they performed at Dake's Opera House, also known as Patton's Opera House, which was on Gurley Street. On the corner, farther east from the Carnegie Library.
So the stage was probably smaller than, it was a small stage, I'm assuming.
Relatively speaking, yes, but it was a fairly decent-sized stage. Yeah,